Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Scientists find clues to pancreatic cancer treatment. Join us for Day 2 of Newsworthy Clips. Hello and welcome back to Advanced Studio Classroom. My name is Brandon and today we are on day 2 of our Newsworthy Clips article. Back in the studio with me, 2 panelists. Welcome, Linda and Albert.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
And we're glad that you are back with us here today. And yesterday we had a rather technical article, and I think we all learned something from yesterday's article. What did we discuss yesterday, Linda?
Well, we talked about scientists editing someone's germline or editing genes.
Mm-hmm. Or editing people's DNA, right? And which can be very controversial. And we talked about the difference between, editing someone's DNA for, things that a lot of people would say is bad, because you're editing a person's DNA and is passing this along to their children. So, for example, if you edit someone's DNA because, you want their kids to be stronger or more beautiful or more intelligent, the panel says that's not a good idea. A lot of people would call that unethical.
Right. I mean, we talked about, I feel like these are things that sound like far off in the future, but it's happening right now in here. So I really hope, we got people to think about it and maybe look into it a little bit and maybe talk about it with their friends and family. And so this is something people should keep an eye out on.
But the real point of yesterday was the CRISPR-Cas9. That's really where we kind of, I think, of the highlight of yesterday's article. It is a revolutionary technique, as we learned yesterday. And when they're talking about this, Linda, they're talking about altering, genes that carry a disease.
Right. Mutations within the genome that cause different kinds of disorders or diseases that lead to a lot of problems. And
the CRISPR-Cas9 is a man-made molecule, and it goes in and edits the DNA. And so the idea is that it will take out the bad genes and so that it won't be passed on to children. And so that's an interesting concept, and it's something that is revolutionary and can be controversial. And so stay tuned to find out more about that in the coming weeks. I'm sure there'll be more in the news about that, and so you can learn more. So that's what we talked about yesterday. Today we are on page 21, and we're moving on to another topic. It's also health-related, and we're talking about pancreatic cancer. Let's first break that down a little bit. When we're talking about the pancreas, what are we referring to, Linda?
Well, we're talking about the organ. It's an important organ that produces insulin, and insulin controls the amount of blood sugar that's in our body. Mm-hmm. And it also produces other substances that help us to digest food.
All right, and the pancreas, it's a gland that's located behind the stomach and in front of the spine. Just in case you were wondering, most of you probably already knew that.
I actually did not. I always forget where it's at.
Okay, well, the scientists, though, they're finding clues to pancreatic cancer, which is always good news. If you hear that the scientists are finding clues to something, and it's they're referring to cancer, your ears, you tune in, because so many people have cancer. So many people are affected by all kinds of cancer. And so there's some good news in store here that we're going to find out about today.
Right, especially how back in May we heard about how, at least in Taiwan, cancer is at an all-time high. So this is applicable to a lot of people around the world.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and open up our magazines if you haven't already to page 21, or maybe you have your digital device there with you. Go ahead and open that up and take a look as we have our first reading for today.
scientists find clues to pancreatic cancer treatment. Pancreatic cancer arguably has one of the worst outcomes among all forms of cancer, with a 1-year relative survival rate of 20% and a 5-year rate of 7%, according to the American Cancer Society. Dr. Abram Handley Santana, a researcher at Cold Spring Harbor Lab, attributes much of the cancer's poor survival rate to the structural makeup of the tumor's outer shell. This enclosure, known as a stroma, might as well be armor because its presence has made it nearly impossible for cancer-killing drugs to penetrate, Handley Santana said. The wall is so tough, Handley Santana added, that some cancer clinical trials involving experimental medications designed to breach the barrier had to be abandoned midstream. The drugs were so harsh, they further sickened already ailing patients, he said. Handley Santana and his collaborators have found a possible new target, a doorway through the stroma to reach the cancer. That vulnerability, he said, is made up of fibroblast cells, a main contributor to the stroma.
All right, thank you, Luke. Well, pancreatic cancer arguably has one of the worst outcomes among all forms of cancer, and so that's not good news. We get some of the stats here, Albert.
Right. So it says 20% survival rate. So if we flip it around, we can say that 80% of people who have pancreatic cancer will die within the first year. And then within a span of 5 years, 93% of the people will die of it.
So only 7% will survive that
right.
long, right?
Yeah.
This is according to the American Cancer Society. And so that's some of the stats there. Doesn't sound too great.
Not very good odds.
But, if you are suffering from this or know someone who is suffering from this, don't lose hope. Some do survive. And hopefully with continued, scientific research and developments, that number will go up even more. And so we do meet a doctor here, and Dr. Abram Handley Santana. And who is he, Linda?
A researcher at Cold Spring Harbor Lab.
Okay, and so this is a researcher, and he attributes much of the cancer's poor survival rate to what?
Well, just the structural makeup, like what it's made of the tumor's outer shell. So it's something that's there's not much research about, and so it's a lot of unknowns. So it's really difficult to figure out.
All right, so we're talking about the way this tumor is made up. It has a certain kind of structure. The outer shell seems to be the main problem, and we have a word here, this enclosure. When we say enclosure, we mean what?
Something that surrounds it.
Okay. So this enclosure, it's known as a stroma, and you see that there as one of our terms, a layer of short connective tissue fibers. And so that's what it's called. This enclosure, it might as well be armor because its presence has made it nearly impossible for cancer-killing drugs to penetrate. And this actually makes sense, right? They're putting the drugs in there, they're trying to penetrate this tumor, and they can't get the medication in there because of this armor, that's, protecting the tumor.
Right. And so they try using more drugs or harsher or stronger drugs, but that doesn't really help out because it ends up hurting the patients.
All right, and Dr. Abram, he says that, the wall is so tough that some cancer clinical trials involving experimental medications designed to breach the barrier, they had to be abandoned midstream. And so they're trying all of these things, and nothing is working. But let's talk about some of those words there. That word breach, Linda.
It means to break through. So they want to break through the barrier, the enclosure, the outer shell of the cancer.
Whenever I hear the word breach, I just think of Titanic and how there was an iceberg. It just breached its ship's walls.
Right. All right. And so they had to abandon this whole plan midstream. That's a good word to know as well. First of all, that word abandon, if you abandon something, you leave it.
Right.
You have a plan in action. You're going forward, and all of a sudden you realize this is not working, and so you abandon the plan. You say, forget about it. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's start over. But if you abandon something midstream, that's a very specific term, meaning what? Midstream.
Well, midstream is just in the middle of something. You know,
Right.
you had a plan, you were to go from A to B, but during the middle of the course of it, or so
Right.
to speak, you just abandoned it.
It makes me think if you're in a stream, if you're in the river and you're out in the middle and all of a sudden you decide to just go back, you retreat, you go back to where you were and start over maybe. Well, that's what has been happening in this situation. And the drugs were so harsh, they actually caused problems.
Right. So these patients who are already sick from cancer, they were further sickened. And here we see the word ailing patients. Ailing just means to be sick or suffering from an illness.
Okay, and so this just sounds terrible. Everything they're trying doesn't seem to be working, and they try stronger medication. That's not helping. It's making the patients even to become more sick. Well, next we see Henley Santana and his collaborators, they found a possible new target. First of all, that word collaborator, you can also use that as a verb. You collaborate with someone on a project. What does it mean if you're a collaborator?
Oh, just someone you're working with, you're helping out. It's a team effort, teamwork.
Okay, great. So they found this new target. They're working together. They found the new target, and we get an explanation here more about this target.
Right, that it's a doorway through the stroma to reach the cancer.
Okay, so they found a doorway. So you get the picture there, this hard outer shell. But if they have a doorway, that's a way through. And we use the word here, vulnerability. What does that mean?
Well, when you're vulnerable, it's you're able to be easily physically, emotionally, or mentally hurt, influenced, or attacked.
Okay, and we can also use this in a little different way. If I'm standing in front of people and I'm going to share something that is very personal, okay, I'm kind of being vulnerable. I'm opening myself up. And that's another usage of that word. But here they're able to get in here to this shell, this armor. And what is it made up of, Linda?
Fibroblast cells.
Ooh.
And
What's
those are
that?
cells that make fibers and collagen.
Okay, and that's the main contributor to the stroma. So far we've set up the problem, and there looks like there's a potential solution here. There's a new target. So let's find out more about that as we go into our next reading.
Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory scientists reported their results in an issue of the Journal of Experimental Medicine. They used tiny 3D organoids, miniature balloon-like structures, in a sea of gelatinous goo to zero in on the stroma's structure. Dr. Craig DeVoe of Northwell Health's Monter Cancer Center said that the puzzle of pancreatic cancer has been difficult to solve because there are so many biological factors that contribute to the cancer's growth and proliferation. The biggest issue is that pancreas cancer has a high metastatic potential, DeVoe said, which means tumors can spread very early in their evolution. Even when the cancer appears to be very small on a scan, he said, it is very possible that it has already metastasized. Symptoms are sometimes vague, but can include jaundice as well as persistent gastrointestinal and mid-back pain.
Okay, so now we move on to the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, and we're talking about the scientists and how they reported their results in an issue of the Journal of Experimental Medicine. And so that's where, this information is coming from. So you can check that out if you're interested. What did they use, Albert?
They use tiny 3D organoids and miniature balloon-like structures to basically replicate and experiment and stimulate how this works and how this happens out.
Okay, so the organoids, they are miniature balloon-like structures. You see that, kind of explained there in between the commas. That's what the organoids are. And this word gelatinous, that word kind of makes me laugh. What does it mean? It just sounds funny, doesn't it?
It just means it's like a jelly-like texture.
Okay.
So, when I was small, we used to eat Jell-O, and it's like, or here, there are a lot of desserts that have a gelatinous nature
do, and like
to
little
it.
pieces of fruit inside it.
Yeah.
Right?
Or what they call, at least in Taipei, they call it a QQ texture. It's like gelatinous and it's chewy and it's like, yeah.
And then we have another fun word, goo. So gelatinous goo. And it's, goo is kind of runny, liquidy kind of thing going on. Yeah.
Like sticky.
I like gooey brownies or gooey cookies.
Oh, whenever I hear the word gooey, I just imagine boogers.
Oh, my
Snot.
goodness.
So, sorry.
Oh, wow. We will not zero in on that. But next it talks about the gelatinous goo, and it talks about zeroing in on stroma's structure. So if you zero in on something, you are focusing on it. And so they use the tiny 3D organoids to zero in on the stroma's structure, right?
Right. So they're targeting, penetrating the stroma's outer layer.
Okay, well, next we meet a doctor, Dr. Craig Devo, and he tells us that the puzzle of pancreatic cancer has been difficult to solve because of what?
Well, there's so many biological factors, and they needed to, narrow it down. Like you said earlier, zero in on what the problem is, and all these factors, they contribute to the cancer's growth and proliferation. So proliferation is when something is thriving and they're able to just, spread.
So there are many factors involved, and any time, especially with something like this, if there are many factors involved, it can be hard to, fix the issue or solve the problem, right, Linda?
Right.
Okay.
To narrow in on what exactly is causing it, or the most important factor.
All right. And Dr. Devo, he tells us more. He says the biggest issue is that pancreas cancer has a high metastatic potential. Now, that is a word that I definitely don't hear every day, Albert. What is the meaning, metastatic?
Well, actually, I hear it a lot because I used to watch all these medical TV shows, and they're like, doctor, the cancer has spread or metastasized. Basically, it's the spread of cancer or other disease from one organ or part of the body to another part, usually just through just how it spreads.
So when we're talking about pancreatic cancer, this is a big issue because there's a high metastatic potential, and so which means tumors can spread very early in their evolution. And so we talked about at the beginning, many people don't survive, who have this cancer, or if they do, they don't live very long.
Right. Yeah, usually and I could be wrong on this, it's, when one organ is sick or has tumors, to spread to another area or a different organ, the cancer will have to change and adapt so it will be able to invade another part of the body. So it's a little difficult for them to jump ship, so to speak, but when it happens, they just metastasize.
Okay, and even when the cancer appears to be very small in the scan, it doesn't mean that it's actually, the case, right? That it's actually that small. What does he finish with?
Right. So that it's very possible it has already metastasized. So although it looks small or maybe localized in the scan, it could have already spread.
Right. So, yes, it could be small, right? But it may have spread to other areas, which, of course, is not what you want. Well, symptoms are sometimes vague, but can include jaundice as well as some other things. First of all, vague. If something is vague, you really don't have a clear understanding of what's going on.
Right, it's unclear.
Okay, and jaundice, what is that?
Well, jaundice is an illness affecting the liver that causes yellowish discoloration of the skin and the white part of your eyes. So discoloration is the color being changed. So I feel like these are symptoms, but that doesn't mean like there's a direct correlation. So, if people, you're having some of these symptoms, please don't freak out. I think the important thing is just to don't be afraid to go to the doctors and get it checked out as early as possible.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, of course, we want people to check things out, but sometimes we can go into sites like WebMD and start looking at symptoms and you think you're dying, which, is not the case, thank God. But, it's good to look at that. But, in many cases anyway, it's not the case. You're right. You're just worrying about nothing. So, don't do that, but be cautious at the same time. Don't worry yourself too much, but be cautious if you do have some of these symptoms. At least have it checked out. All right, and then we go in and we talk about some other symptoms here, Linda.
Right. Well, what's mentioned is persistent gastrointestinal and mid-back pain. So if you're having consistent problems with your maybe stomach and digestive tract or mid-back pain. But then again, mid-back pain, that could be a symptom for many things. But maybe all three of these symptoms then should definitely be aware and get checked out.
Right, I think that's a good point. If you have all three, that could be something for sure to check out. All right, so today we've been talking about pancreatic cancer, and they've, found this possible new target, which is great news. Hopefully the medication, can get through and, help those with pancreatic cancer eventually. But yesterday we talked about the editing of DNA. So we've had two kind of medical articles here, and I want to just kind of review a little bit about these. What did you learn from these, or at least one of these, Albert?
Well, I really like their approach in regards to the pancreatic cancer treatment. The scientists were like, well, we're going to go and find out what that material is that's, making it impenetrable or really difficult to get to the cancer cells itself. And so they were able to figure that out and know what the material is, and now they can use different alternatives or techniques to get around that material that's protecting the cancer cells and stop it at the source. And this way it won't come back or grow or get worse.
Okay.
So that's really a really good approach.
Okay, great. And Linda, something that you learned from the past couple of days?
Well, just learning about this revolutionary technique, the CRISPR-Cas9, and how it could, by editing a person's genes, that could treat them, for different disorders, cancers, or diseases, and it can do it without altering their germline, so we don't have to worry so much about that controversial issue.
Hopefully, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it does not lead into other areas. And it could lead into other areas. That's why it is controversial. And so that's why yesterday we talked a lot about, the panelists, and they said, there are a lot of things you need to take into account: societal fairness, personal dignity, and scientific integrity. And, there should be more debate about this as well.
Right. And I like how we have, I never knew this job existed before we brought this article to our viewers or listeners. It's bioethicists. And it's really nice to know that there are people that are working really hard to figure out like the consequences and the potential risk or outbreaks or just problems that might come up. But I mean, like, even if we try and plan for everything, we mentioned in the first day, there are unforeseen possibilities. Just like as an example, like we introduced pesticides and it ended up like hurting bald eagles. These are things that no one can foresee. Yeah.
Right. So we don't always know what is going to happen. And so lots of things need to be, studied beforehand so you can hopefully rule out some of those things. And you have to proceed with caution. Well, there are also so many good words here that we learned over the past couple of days. On the first day, we had the phrase predisposed to something, okay, which means to make someone more likely to behave in a particular way. You can be predisposed to a certain disease, or you can, be predisposed to maybe a certain habit. What are some other words that stuck out for you, Linda?
Well, scrutiny, that these trials and this whole concept of gene editing should be conducted under close public scrutiny, that close examination, that people know what's going on and that they have a say on this topic.
All right. And Albert, a word that stuck out for you?
Well, I would say unforeseen, because I feel like this is really crucial in how, like, we were talking about how scientists should proceed with this new technique.
Okay. And there are many other words that maybe you highlighted as you were reading that we don't even have marked, but that you can look up later. And I would just encourage you to practice using those words as much as possible so you will remember them. Oftentimes, we read new words and then, we forget about them. So we encourage you to go out and practice using these new words that you've learned today, that you're learning this month. And we also encourage you to check out our Topic Talks videos. You can see skits and other things there. So just take out your phone. You can scan the QR code there at the top of page 20, or you can go online to our website, studioclassroom.com, and you can watch the videos there. And we hope that you enjoy those. And if you have any feedback for us about these topics or others, please write into us at letters@studioclassroom.com and let us know your thoughts. And so we've had a lot that we've been talking about the past 2 days. It's been kind of technical. It's been kind of medical. Tomorrow, we are going to talk more about technology. And so we are shifting gears a bit there. We're going to be talking about Snapchat. Many of you may have that app. We're going to talk more from the business end about Snapchat. So we hope that you will join us for day 3 of our Newsworthy Clips article. Until then, this is Brandon,
Linda,
and Albert
saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.